Hey team, in this video we're going to look at the Avalanche Quick Start guide. Under Quick Start, let's go to the Avalanche section here and click on the Avalanche Pangolin rewards project. Now, the goal of this Quick Start is that we're going to index all tokens deposited and transferred from within the project. Now, what is Avalanche, you might be asking? Well, going to the Avalanche website here, you can see that you can't actually understand exactly what it does here, but if we go into the documentation site here, selecting Learn About Avalanche, you can then see that Avalanche is an open source platform for building decentralized applications, all interoperable, decentralized, and highly scalable as well. Now, Pangolin, what is that? On the website here, you can see that it's actually a multi-chain decentralized digital asset exchange, or DEX, that is available on Avalanche as well, amongst other networks that you can see here, such as Flare, Hedera, Songbird, and Evmos. The first step when creating a project is to check that we have the required prerequisites. Navigating to Quick Start in the documentation site here, and then going to step 1, create a new project. You can see that we need Node, Docker, and the SubQuery CLI. Now let's do a quick system check in VS Code where I can run node-v, and if I've got Node installed, it will return a version, which here you can see is 20.3.1. If you don't see a version, it means you don't have Node installed, so do a quick Google search for Node and you can install it. Or if you're using brew on a Mac, you can run the command brew install node as well. After this, you'll need to install Docker, which you can again run via a Google search. And then the last step is to download the SubQuery command line. And you can do this by running npm or node package manager install -g for global subql CLI. Now, just a note that you need to have Node installed first before running npm, because when you install Node, the Node package manager gets installed along with it. Once this is installed, jump into VS Code and run subql-v to get the version, and you can see here I'm running version 3.5.1. Once you have all of these installed, you're now ready to start creating your first project. To create a project, we want to first run the subql init command. We can then provide a name for the project, such as Pangolin example, and then hit enter, and then you'll see I'll get given a list of networks that I can choose. Let me go down to Avalanche here, and then select the Avalanche network, and then the Avalanche starter project. What you'll see on the left-hand side are files and folders that are automatically created to help with the project creation, the scaffolding, so to speak. And then the RPC endpoint, we're asked to enter this. However, we can just accept the default in yellow here, which I'll do so by hitting enter. And then I can continue to accept the defaults of the other parameters. Now, you'll see that I get asked a question if I want to generate a scaffold from an existing ABI file. Because this is EVM compatible, I can actually point to an ABI file and have a lot of the code auto-generated for me. But what I'll do here is I'll select N for no, because we want to build this from scratch. And there we have it. We're now ready to start creating our first project. After we've initialized our project, we want to download all our project dependencies. So to do this, we want to cd into the project directory first, and then we want to run a command called yarn install. Now this will take about 30 seconds or so, so sit back and I'll catch you after this is finished. The first file we're interested in is called the project.yaml file, and this is also known as the manifest file. Now, this can be viewed as the entry point to your project defining most of the details on how SubQuery will index and transform the chain data. It also indicates where we're indexing from and to what chain events we're subscribing to. At the top here, you can see we've got a spec version number and the name of our project here. And then we've got the version and various other details, which we'll see in the documentation how it's defined. We've also got the description and also the repository as well. We're pointing to the schema.graphql file, which is a very important file, which we'll talk about next. And then in the network section, we've got the chain ID of our network, and then the endpoint where we're extracting the blockchain data from. We're also using a dictionary, which helps speed up the performance of our project. And everything we've discussed so far doesn't have to be changed. The next section in data sources, we do need to update. And what I'll do is let's go into our quickstart project again. And I'm going to scroll down to the data sources section, and I'll copy this out from our example guide. Let's copy this, and then I'm going to remove the existing one, and then paste the new one in. Let me save it, and let me increase the screen here. Now, what we have here is we're using the Ethereum runtime because the Avalanche C chain is EVM compatible. We're also indexing from a start block of about 7.9 million. So this is the block when the first reward is made. We've then got the address of the Pangolin reward contract. And then down below here, we're pointing to the actual ABI file of the smart contract in order to interact with it. And then down below here, we've got one handler called handle log. And what this is saying is that we're going to be running this handle log mapping function whenever a reward paid topic filter is encountered in the logs of a transaction on the Avalanche network. And to get more information about this, if we go back into the documentation, we can check out the manifest file. Let me open this up in a new tab. And then you can see here we've got the definition of some of the top level specs that I talked about. And if we scroll down to the data sources spec, you can see here we've got the different handlers, the block, transaction, the log, and we're using a log handler, therefore we've got the topics filter available to us. The second file of interest out of the three that we need to change is the schema file. Now the schema.graphql file essentially determines the shape of the data that we want to extract from the blockchain. So let's go ahead and jump back to our quick start guide. I'm going to copy the example schema file here. Let's copy this out. And then I'm going to replace it, save it. And what you can see here is we've got two entities or two database tables, so to speak. We've got one entity called Pangolin rewards and one called user as well. Now the fields within the entities are similar to database table columns, and we've got 6 fields here and 3 in the user entity. So what we're saying is that we're extracting block number as a big integer, our block hash is a string, and the exclamation mark signifies a mandatory field. Now what you'll see is that the receiver field is actually of type user, and the rewards field here is actually what we call a reverse lookup, because the value is actually derived from the receiver field in the Pangolin rewards entity, which is essentially a virtual field. So this is also where the documentation comes in handy, because if I scroll down, you'll see a link to GraphQL schema, and it's here where I can understand how each entity needs an ID field with an exclamation mark, meaning it's mandatory, serving as the unique primary key. You can also see the other supported scalar types here, float, date, boolean, etc., and some entity relationships if applicable. On the right hand side here, you can see we've got a one-to-one relationship, one-to-many, and also many to many. And if I click on reverse lookup, you'll see this is where it defines what the derived from field means. So basically, it's a field that points to another field in another entity, creating a virtual field on that entity that can be queried. And here is an example here in the documentation if you want more information. The last file that we want to modify is called the mappings file, and you can find this in the source mappings called mappinghandlers.ts. So let's go ahead, jump back into the quick start guide, and we'll copy out the provided mappings file, and then we'll paste it into our one, save it. And then looking at the top here, you can see that we first import some classes and types, and then we've got two functions. We've got this check get user and also the handle log function as well. Now, this handle log function, remember, this is the one that links to our handler in our manifest file, handle log here. So whenever a log is found, this function is triggered, which then comes into our mapping handler. And what this does is it goes ahead and it receives a variable called event of type reward paid log. And then it's inside this event variable that we can access the various blockchain data, such as the block number that we are logging to the console for debugging purposes. We then check the arguments here, and if valid, we go ahead and call this helper function, which you can see up here. And what this does is it tries to get an existing user. If the user does not exist, then we go ahead and create a brand new user, and then we return the user back to the handle log function, where we can go ahead and then create a brand new record here, where our unique ID is going to be the block hash with a dash, and then the log index. We can then go ahead and extract the various blockchain data, such as the transaction hash, the blockchain hash, the user ID, etc., into our record, and then we can call save on the user and also on the Pangolin reward record as well. To build our project, we first want to run a command called yarn code gen. And what this does is it uses the graphql.schema file and generates the associated TypeScripts. So let's go and run this. And you can see that we get an error here because it's looking for a file that doesn't exist. So if I go to the ABI file here, you can see that we've got this Pangolin ERC20, but our manifest file is referencing this Pangolin reward file. So let's first copy out this contract address, and I want to go back into our browser. Let's go to a website called Snowtrace, which is Avalanche C Chains Explorer. I'll paste in this contract address, and you can see I can click on the contracts tab, and I've got access to the ABI file here. So let's copy this to clipboard. Now the ABI file tells our project how to interact or how to talk with the contract. So let's go into the Pangolin JSON file. Let's remove what we have, paste in this new one. Let me just format this neatly. And then I'll go ahead and change the file. Let's copy the name, rename it here like so. And then I'll run yarn code gen again. And there we have it. It's run successfully. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll build the project by running yarn build. This basically optimizes the code, preparing for deployment. But you can see I've got an error saying it's expected 6 arguments but got 1. And that's because when we ran yarn code gen in our types directory, which automatically got generated in our Pangolin rewards.ts, we have a constructor that is expecting 6 fields. But what happens is inside our code here, we are instantiating a new Pangolin reward object. We're only passing in 1 parameter here instead of 6. So we could go ahead and provide 5 more. However, a quick fix is to remove the exclamation mark from our Pangolin rewards entity, making this optional. And I did this because I wanted to demonstrate whenever you update the schema file, you want to run yarn code gen again. Now this is run successfully, like so. And if you go back to the Pangolin reward, you'll see the constructor only has one required field now. So if I go and run yarn build, the error has disappeared. Now from here, the next step is to go ahead and start Docker. So I'm going to run yarn start Docker, and then I'll go and show you my Docker console here. You can see the various images being downloaded and the nodes being started. And from here, what I'll do is let's go and copy out a sample query from our quick start guide. Here it is. Copy this out, and then I'll jump into our playground. Over here, I'll paste in our query and I'll run it. And you can see we've got some data coming back, which is great. Now, I'm going to need a bit more information. So let's go block hash, block number, and then maybe the transaction hash as well. Let's run that. And I'm going to need this in order to do a cross check, because if I copy out the transaction hash and we'll go back into our block explorer, let me search for this particular transaction hash, hit enter. And now if I do a quick comparison, what you should notice is that I've got an amount down here for 48.53, which is the same amount that we see here, 48.53, noting that it's missing the decimal place. The block number is 491, and it should be 491 here. Indeed it is. So there we have it. We've got this project indexing all token deposits and transfers from Avalanche's Pangolin token project.